What's up people, this is Palmal92 back with an updated build video for the Magicka DK 2.5 Shadows of the Hiss DLC. It's been a long time since I've uploaded my initial build video back in 2.3, simply because in Dark Brotherhood there weren't many adjustments to make to the Magicka DK. I was quite disappointed actually. Still, I was completely stunned by the positive feedback and the amount of views, especially considering that I had 0 subscribers at the point where I've uploaded the video. So thank you very much for that. I want to keep this short. This is basically the reason why I even decided to update it, and yeah, you know, I'm not a professional YouTuber or anything, so it took some time, but finally it's here. Many of you asked for it, and I hope you guys enjoy. As always, we're going to start off with my champion points, followed by the gear that changed a lot, actually, I can already tell. And yeah, last but not least, we're going to take a look at the skills, which I'm not going to explain too much this time because it took a lot of time, but the overview will be there as always. So yeah, enjoy guys, thank you very much for watching. Again, we're going to kick off with the blue champion points, which means the apprentice. Not too many things have changed here, just a few adjustments actually. Still, I've only put my points into 2 different perks here, Elfborn and Elemental Expert. Again, you always want to remember to hit a jump point in your Elfborn, which in my case is 42. One quick note though, since the last patch has released, I've experienced that many people seem to have found out different jump points for Elfborn, so I'm not 100% sure if this one's right. I couldn't find any clear information on the internet about that neither. If I'm wrong and you're 100% sure of what you're saying, please write me a comment in the comment section, and sorry in advance for that. Next up, we got 86 points into Elemental Expert for our 22.5% buff, still not 100 because we put more into Thaumaturge to buff our dots. Then we got 1 into Staff Expert. This one's new, simply because I found it pretty useful in DPS tests, because you get a 1% weaving attack damage buff just for investing 1 single champion point. Last but not least, we got 48 into Thaumaturge for a 15% dot damage buff. Again, you want to find the right balance between this one and Elemental Expert to not only maximize your single target burst DPS, but also your dots. The red ones then are again completely depending on the situation that you're in. I'm pretty much spec'd on physical damage, as I see, with some points into Thick Skin for reduced dot damage. But the thing that I find always important, regardless of the situation that you're in, is the increased self-heal, at least 30 points, also for the infusion passive, which is quite useful if you rest people, especially healers. In my case, it's 42 for the 9.5% buff at the moment. Next up, we got 100 into Magician, still basic stuff for every Magicka build, don't get rid of that. 30 into Arcanist, because our base region is still really low. And the 10 new ones are actually invested in Tenacity. Why? As I'm using the Molten Armaments move that's buffing heavy attacks pretty often for ranged DPS situations where I'm not like close all the time, this one is pretty helpful to just restore some additional Magicka in sticky situations. Last but not least, we got 22 into Tumbling for reduced dodge roll cost and break free, and 15 into reduced block cost. Reason for that is simply because, especially in the new trials like Hellra, you have to block a lot of attacks, also in Sanctum for example, and if you're out of stamina, you pretty much die. So yeah, that's it about the champion points, pretty quick this time, and next up is the gear again. As many of you have probably already expected, gear is what changed the most for the Magicka Dragonknight in this whole patch, and therefore for my build. So let's get to basically the core of this whole build video and show you guys what I'm running at the moment and what does make this build so powerful. Looking at my stats, I'm sitting at 41k max magic, 19.7k health and 700 magic regen. So not too many things have changed about that. My spell damage though dropped down to 2100 on the tooltip. So let me get one thing straight. The word tooltip plays a big role for this build in general, because actually, as much as I think that spell damage is an overrated value, this build is all about high spell damage, even though it might not be visible in your stats. More on this later. One thing though that's mentionable that indeed increases my tooltip spell damage is my weapon enchant. So yes, I'm not running a Maelstrom staff anymore, so I got rid of the permanent 189 buff. If I proc this staff's enchantment though, I'm sitting at 2400 on the front and 2600 spell damage on the back bar, where I'm indeed still using a Maelstrom flame staff, as you can see. Continuing with the spell crit, we're at 58.7%. This one also dropped down a little bit as we now use a sharpened staff on the front bar, simply because I find it to do more damage in boss fights, so I use it over the precise one that I used previously. Unfortunately, our spell pen is not visible in the stats neither, so overall, if you like show-off setups, this one may not be right for you, unfortunately. The real power behind this combo will become visible once we're at the DPS test. One quick note about that, this time I decided to do the DPS test at Bloodspawn simply because it reflects a real fight situation much better, and therefore it's also kind of a harder DPS test, so don't be shocked if the results are not completely over the top. It's normal that you usually do a bit less at Bloodspawn, as you for example don't stand in your standard all the time, but overall you will also get a way better impression of the rotation and so on. So I'm really happy to show you a Bloodspawn DPS test this time and not a crocodile one like the previous one. Talking about Manda Stones, Thief and Shadow, common stuff for the twice spawn, max health, max Magicka, buff food, not too many new stuff about that. So what am I using? Flame Staff of the Sun, spell damage enchant in sharpen. Many of you may have seen it coming. The sunset has been very popular since the patch has launched, and it's completely awesome. On the back bar, Flame Staff of the Maelstrom in precise. I have to admit though that if I had a precise sun staff, I would probably go for that one over the Maelstrom staff, because even if it appears that I have a higher spell damage on the back bar with this staff because of the additional 189 spell damage, I lose the Sun 5 piece, which is obviously not really good. So if I had one, I would use a Sun staff on both bars. About the traits, why am I using a precise one on the back bar? Well, the reason is pretty simple. As I got all of my AoE abilities slotted on my back bar pretty much, a precise one is just more beneficial. Why? As ads have lower resistances than bosses, these are usually already on 0 if you're in a good group. So overall you just get more out of precise than out of sharpen, because there are no resistances to penetrate anymore if you like. So far about the weapons, talking about the ammo, there's our second ammo piece, Head of the Sun. You can already tell my whole gear is max Magicka enchanted, and in Divines for our twice born, which is our second set in line. As previously, we're still using a 5 piece, 1 heavy, 1 medium for the Undaunted bonus, really important for the Magicka DK. And our 7th ammo piece then is a Maelstrom classic shoulder piece. Last but not least, on the jewelry we run 3-piece Sun, all arcane, all spell damage, all legendary. I mean, if we can get it in gold, why not get it in gold and go best in slot? Fuck the price. So, if I may briefly sum it up, we run 5 Sun, 5 Twiceborn and 1 Maelstrom. One thing I may need to justify myself for in terms of the composition is why am I running a Sun Destro and not 2 Sun Armor pieces and therefore 2 Maelstrom staffs as in my previous build. Well, the reason is pretty simple. If you outsource your 5th Sun piece on your weapon, you can get a Maelstrom shoulder piece, so the loss is not that high. You actually only lose 60 spell damage and the Maelstrom enchant for the elemental blockade. What you gain though is the enchantment that you can apply on your sand staff that grants 348 spell damage for 5 seconds. Also, this one has a fairly low cooldown, so you got it up pretty much all of the fight, and overall you just deal more damage with this combination than with a Maelstrom staff. For this reason, by the way, many people, even who have Maelstrom staffs, went away from them simply because you just deal more DPS overall. Also, for some of you, this may be very fortunate because you don't have to necessarily run the arena anymore to get the weapons. So far about the composition, so far about the sets, so let's talk about the Sun because that one's new. It's a 5 piece, so it has to be somehow good, otherwise I wouldn't be using it, right? If we look at the bonuses, we get 1k max health, 1k max magic, 129 spell damage, and the 5-piece bonus that says your abilities that deal flame damage get an increased 400 spell damage. So what does this mean? Because at first I wasn't really sure about that bonus, and I didn't know, do I get 400 additional damage for each of my abilities that basically just get added, as with the Maelstrom staff, it just adds a certain amount of damage to your weaving attacks? Or do I really get indeed an increase of my base spell damage of 400? And my testing indicated this is truly the case, and it's completely awesome, because as you guys know, all of our abilities do flame damage. My second question then was, does it only affect damage on impact abilities like your Molten Whip, Flames of Oblivion, or does it also buff dots? Yes, it also buffs dots, and yes, it buffs all their single ticks per second. And last but not least, yes, it also buffs your weaving attacks. So the tooltip itself is not completely correct here. It also buffs your weaving attacks. Pretty much everything that does flame damage gets empowered by this. So you can genuinely say that as a Magicka DK, just to end this and to get back of my tooltip explanation, you run around with 2500 spell damage unbuffed with this build, with no argument, is completely more than in the previous build, not even considering the spell power enchant on our staff. So this is the reason why this set is so powerful, even at first look. If you then look at the other three bonuses, what do we get? 1k max health, pretty decent, because as you may have recognized, we don't use Scoria anymore, so this one compensates the health loss that we would otherwise have. And as you know, in a raid, you should always sit at high health if possible. And secondly, we got max magic and spell power, which pretty much compensates the fact that we don't run willpower anymore. So overall, if you just sum everything up, we have around 450 less magicka, because willpower gives us 1400 and a bit more spell power, as Molakina in combination with our sunset gives us 2 times 129, which is more than the 186 buff from willpower. So overall, the sunset just completely impressed me. I did a lot of testing, and I also find it to be more beneficial than the usual combo everybody else is running around since Shadows of the Hist, which is 3 Moon Dancer, 3 willpower, and 5 Twiceborn. If anybody else can prove me wrong for the Magicka DK, please write me a comment in the comment section. But I tested it a lot of times. I have both combinations together, and for the Magicka DK I just completely prefer the sunset. So far about the gear, I didn't want to talk too much, even though there's lots of new information. Let's go on with the skills, guys. Talking about my skills, you'll recognize that not too many things have necessarily changed, or to be precise, it's just my single target setup that needs a few adjustments. My all-around setup and my rotations in general remain exactly the same. For those who haven't watched my initial build video, I would highly recommend to do so if you're interested in as to why and how I use my skills together in combination to maximize my DPS output. Apart from that, I'm not going to go too much into detail, because this one's already covered in the first video and I don't want to be repetitive. So let me start off with the front bar. I still run Molten Whip as my single target burst ability, Inner Light as my crit buff, followed by my 3 short-term dots, Engulfing Flames, Elemental Blockade, Burning Embers, and Shooting Star for the max magic, while on the back bar, it's still Deep Breath and Elemental Ring for the AoE. Even though I have to say that now that we're not running Vulcan Scoria anymore, you can also go for Pulsar if nobody else is running it in your group. Usually it should be a Sork, because the dot is not necessary to proc it anymore. Also, we still got our Flames of Oblivion. Remember the little trick that it also works on your front bar. And last but not least, our, if you like, second long-term dot, the Eruption. Right here where I now got the Force Pulse, I previously had my Molten Armaments. If you use Spell Power Potions and don't have any issues with your Magicka Sustain, Force Pulse is obviously doing way better damage, so go for that one. Otherwise, I do that myself a lot too, just stick with your Molten Armaments. Our beloved Standard of Might still remains unchanged. Best ultimate in the game, in my opinion. Maybe Overload is better, but you know, I just love the DK, so Well, so what did change actually? What's new? Let me show you the old setup first. This was pretty much what I ran previously, also for DPS tests, when I was playing with my Magicka Dragonknight. So as you can see, our proxy that I really loved a lot, but you know, it's just shit right now. Usually I'm not giving too much about tooltips, but 5600 is just shit. So what are we using instead? Well, to be honest, there is no real DPS skill that's worth using, so this one became pretty much my flexible spot for functional skills, like the chains, any defensive skills like the explosive armor, or mainly I'm using Absorb Magic. For those who have watched our first skill video of Maw of Lorkai, this is exactly the setup that I'm using at the last boss. Or sometimes I even tend to use, like in Sanctum, the Purge to waste my Magicka. So this one you can pretty much do whatever you want. Usually I'm not a fan of defensive skills, but as you know, if you die, there's a simple rule: you do 0 damage, so you should prevent dying. So yeah, that's pretty much already it about the skills. One little detail that might be interesting, as I'm now running a Maelstrom Destro on the back bar, which is not even intended 100%. If you really want to get maximum DPS, you should put your Elemental Blockade on the back bar and the Eruption on the front bar, because if you then do the Elemental Blockade, you still get the buff on the front bar, as you can see. This would be technically a bit more DPS, even though the bar switching and all this stuff, especially on console where there's a lot of lag, is in the end maybe even more of a DPS loss than of a DPS gain, so I'm not doing it. If you're completely pathetic and have like cracked fingers that can do this shit, just do it. Me myself, I still stick with my old skill setup because I just love my rotation as it is. So here it comes, the DPS test, the reason why all this stuff is so dope. Have fun. In this first self-buff only DPS test video, I decided to show you guys the rotation again from scratch in slow motion, as it still appears to be complicated for some of you. As you can see, I start the fight with a heavy attack followed by an eruption, then I switch my bar to apply my short-term dots that are Engulfing Flames, Burning Embers and Elemental Blockade. This I call the long dot rotation, as it involves all dots including the back bar dots. Make sure to cast the Elemental Blockade at last, because it only lasts 8 seconds. After that you want to whip around 6 times to renew your front bar dots only right before they expire. Engulfing Flames, Burning Embers, and then Elemental Blockade. After that you whip around 3 to 4 times to do your long dot rotation again to renew your Eruption, first one, then your Flames of Oblivion secondly, and at last your Beast Trap. After that I cast my ultimate here, swap bars, short-term dots, 6 times whip, then you do again short-term dot rotation, 3 times whip, long-term dot, 6 times whip, short-term dot, 3 times whip. That's it. You just do this over and over again. Once you got it, it will be really easy, and that way you keep up your dots all the time. In this self-buff only DPS test video, I scored 34k DPS or 45 to 46 seconds, not really sure anymore. So this one's already pretty decent. And the next one, as you can see, I received full buffs including Warhorn, Combat Prayer and Spell Power Cure that led to a total DPS output of 42k over the whole fight. So some of you might think that this is not a big difference compared to the last one, even though at the last one the whole DPS test was during my standard at a short-term fight, and this one is a long fight that lasts around 37 seconds, I think, 36 seconds, so it's much better than the last build, as you can tell. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask me. I try to reply to anyone, and I see you guys in the next build video. Bye bye.